Hi, everybody. My name is Maggie Dethloff. I'm the Assistant Curator of Photography and New Media at the Cantor. I'm really excited to be here to welcome you to this event and introduce our speakers. So I will start out with a brief introduction. Welcome to tonight's Museum Nights. The event is called A Conversation with Diana Lee, Art, Technology, and Activism. Tonight's event is presented in conjunction with the Cantor's current, right now only available digitally exhibition, When Home Won't Let You Stay, Migration Through Contemporary Art, which features artworks by Diana and 17 other international contemporary artists. These artists are reflecting on migration and ideas of home and belonging. The artists are from, live in, or work in over a dozen different countries. Some of them are themselves migrants or refugees. And so some of them are sharing personal reflections on migration or poetic meditations or reflections on what you see in the more dominant media about migration today. As we all know, migration's not a new phenomenon, but this exhibition also calls attention to ways that it can change through different historical and political or social developments. And one thing that's been really meaningful to me in working on this exhibition is thinking about how the Cantor's presentation of this traveling exhibition takes on different nuances thanks to the unique histories of the Bay Area, California, and also the United States more broadly. So the Cantor's presentation includes work by two artists who were not included in the other presentations of the show. And Diana's one of those artists. I specifically chose Diana's work because of the way I felt that it speaks to issues of home, habitation, migration, and labor in the Bay Area. So it is my pleasure to introduce Diana Lee and our other conversation participants for this evening. Diana Lee is a curator, artist, and arts organizer based in the San Francisco Bay Area. She currently serves as the program coordinator at the Asian Pacific Islander Cultural Center and the managing director at the Asian American Women Artists Association. Her curated exhibitions include Agrariana, art inspired by API Agricultural Roots, 2019, Appendix, 2016, and the film and visual art showcases of Kearney Street Workshops, Aperture in 2016-17. Her art and video work has been featured at the Contemporary Jewish Museum, Root Division, Southern Exposure, Soma Arts, Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, and CamFest. Diana has also coordinated multiple festivals and programs within the APA community, including Aperture and the United States of Asian America Festival, presented by the Asian Pacific Islander Cultural Center. Joining Diana Lee tonight is Nadine Rambeau. She is the Executive Director of EPACENTER in Palo Alto, which is a new creative youth development center that harnesses the power of art, creativity, and culture to accelerate positive developmental outcomes for youth in need. Along with an engaged community of youth and local and national stakeholders, Ms. Rambeau is developing EPACENTER's vision of an inclusive Silicon Valley, where people of color are creative and innovative leaders in every sector, and economic and social success is enjoyed by all. In her work at EPACENTER, Ms. Rambeau draws on her prior experiences at the California Institute of the Arts, the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, and the City of Chicago Department of Cultural Affairs, where she activated creativity as a catalyst for youth empowerment, economic equality, and social change. She holds an MFA in Critical Studies from the California Institute of the Arts and a BA in Political Science from Northwestern University. We've also got with us tonight my colleague Aleesa Pitchamarn Alexander. She's the Assistant Curator of American Art at the Cantor Art Center. With Professor Marcy Kwan, Alexander is leading the Asian American Art Initiative, which we've recently formally launched. Congratulations, Aleesa. The initiative aims to transform the Cantor into a preeminent institution for the collection, display, and study of art of the Asian diaspora in the United States. Her curatorial practice is driven by a commitment to social justice, a broad and critical understanding of what constitutes American art, and a desire to collaborate with living artists. She's the daughter of a Thai immigrant and first-generation college graduate, and as such, she's passionate about demystifying museum practice for those who are interested in the field. She received her PhD in art history from the University of California, Santa Barbara in 2018 with her dissertation, Unaccountable Modernisms, the Black Arts of Post-Civil Rights, Alabama. Her bio goes on, and you can read it on the Cantor's website. So I'll close there and get the conversation started with a question for Diana. So Diana, can you tell us about your work in the exhibition called Nest, and a little bit about the themes and ideas you were working through in your art at the time you created Nest?
Yeah, how serendipitous that there's an airplane in the background of Maggie's video. But first I want to say thank you, Maggie and Aubrey and Mackenzie, also for putting this together, and Cantor Art. It's an honor and privilege to present my work at the Cantor Art Center. I'm tuning in from from Chechnya Ohlone land. My family resides on Ramaytush Ohlone land. Yeah, to answer your question, talking about the airplanes. So the way it works is there's a radio at the top to describe the piece, and that radio is tuned to air traffic control, and it's connected to a box in the middle of the nest there, and that connects to a light bulb. So the sound that is coming through the radio gets translated into energy for this light bulb. So it's kind of like I guess a beacon, but also like kind of a godly, like spiritual, like where is this voice coming from, and why is it lighting up this bulb at the bottom, and why is the light bulb at the bottom? But I think so I made this piece in my first year of grad school at San Francisco Art Institute. And back then I was thinking a lot about technology. My dad is he's a technician, and he fixes and installs home entertainment systems and home appliances. So this was like my first semester of grad school, and I didn't know what I was going to make, but I saw just a stack of cables in the backyard, and it was already kind of looking like a nest. And I was like, what if I wove it into a different kind of nest? And then the ideas kind of just flowed from there. I think conceptually, I was working very conceptually in grad school too. So some of the topics that I kind of dove into had to do with my family's diaspora, and my parents were born and raised in Peru, and they're Chinese Peruvian, and they immigrated to the Bay Area, where they found their home in San Mateo. So so my dad, I also grew up kind of in my dad's van as well, and my sister can also talk about that too. But we would play in the back of his van, and we would go to all these houses that were much more well off. They were rich to middle class homes in Silicon Valley, Palo Alto, Mountain View, and I think in grad school, something that I was reflecting on was just how our home is very much in service of other homes, and how just our house is very cluttered with a bunch of technology that many of my dad's customers kind of like left off with him, and so some of that included this cable nest and this old radio and whatnot. So that's kind of the gist of where the idea for this piece came from. I can go into more about my grandmother, who also had, when she was very close to passing, she had dementia. And so there was kind of this, this like confusion between, I guess, time and space. And that memory kind of influenced a lot of my work during grad school as well, in terms of how we communicate through technological means and how we move through space as well, through art installations and whatnot.
Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Diana, especially for sharing, you know, your family's story and the origins of this piece from that perspective. I also wanted to ask if you could talk a little bit more about the histories of the Bay Area, or what kinds of histories in the US you were thinking about when creating this work. And also, Nadine and Aleesa, I just want you to feel free to jump in anytime.
A quick question before we move on to your wonderful question, Maggie. And it's actually a question for you, and wondering why you chose Diana's amazing piece to include in When Home Won't Let You Stay. Also, I loved the wonderful placement next to, I think, the Gulnar ideally airplane, so like very nice curatorial choice. But I'm curious why you chose that piece.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. So I really wanted to include somebody from the Bay Area, and there are other Bay Area artists that are already included in the show. But when I realized I had a little bit of space in the show that I could fill with something, I was relatively new to Stanford, and so I was also getting to know the Bay Area and Stanford and its histories, and really enjoying thinking about how to take a show like this and put it into our particular context. And so I really wanted to add more voices and more stories about the Bay Area in particular. I also, it's a show about migration. It's an international show about migration. So I was also thinking about what kinds of artists are represented, of what nationalities, of what backgrounds. And I came across the Asian American Women Artists Association website and started clicking through bios. And when I saw Diana's work, when I saw Nest in particular, I thought, this is exactly it. This is exactly what I wanted to kind of tap into, thinking about technology in the Silicon Valley and how, you know, technology, communications technology, but travel technology like airplanes, how embedded in our area right here, those kinds of technologies are, and how those have informed histories of migration. Diana's work also, which I hope she will talk about, you know, it speaks to issues of labor around who creates technology. And so I think I just thought it was particularly interesting. The weaving of the wire, I also thought was very interesting in relation to Gulnar's work, which is how I came up with that combo.
To answer your question about like migration within the Bay Area, I think something that struck me when I first visited the Cantor and you gave me a tour of the whole museum, the part of the museum that struck me was the cave where all of Stanford's paraphernalia are. Just remembering that Stanford was also a person who was like a huge advocate for the railway system in California and like that movement. And so something that I was like learning or looking into a lot during when I was making this series of work was also, I guess, like how Asian Americans were brought in for, or I guess Asian Americans and Latino immigrants were also brought in for like cheap labor after the abolishment of slavery. It's not truly abolished right now, but for cheap labor. So so I was thinking about that and trains and how Chinese Americans were also like erased from that history of building the railroad tracks and whatnot. And at the same time, there were these films coming out, Ghost in the Shell, where I guess white actors were playing Asian characters. And I was thinking a lot about, I guess, futurism and how it's very difficult to see at that time Asian Americans exist in the present in mainstream media. We're either like casted as this futuristic cyborg or something that is traditional or spiritual. And I think relating back to Nest, I was just thinking about also how all of this is tied to my father's work in the Bay Area, and how it's tied to a lot of labor in the Bay Area. A book I recommended earlier to the programming team was Microchips for Millions by Janice Sapigao. And she writes poetry about her mother who worked in a microchip factory, which also gives off a lot of toxins and whatnot, and is not great for the body, for our environment and whatnot. So there's a lot of unseen labor in technology that we don't really talk about. We're mostly like just using it, you know, or thinking about how the tech industry is kind of impeding in our space. And it's also really interesting in our current sphere how during the pandemic, a lot of tech industries there's an exodus of tech from the area as well. And a lot of businesses are moving to Texas and whatnot. So it'll be interesting to see how that turns out. But yeah, there's multiple layers of migration and labor in this piece and in the Bay Area. And yeah, and it's been occupied by a number of peoples.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point that you bring up, Diana, of all the different people who have lived in this area, who have worked in this area, and also the histories of why various people have lived in this area and where in this area they've lived. And I know, Nadine, you've been thinking about some of these questions also in the founding of EPACENTER, thinking about the specific histories of this area. Can you tell us a little bit about EPACENTER and its goals and what histories you've been thinking about?
So first, I do want to say thank you for having me. I'm really excited to engage in this conversation and to talk about Diana's work. So, you know, EPACENTER is very unique in the nonprofit sector. It was actually created as a result of, youth in the community who were activated around specific needs in the city of East Palo Alto. East Palo Alto is a 2.5 square mile, city that is right beside Palo Alto. It's divided by the 101 highway, but it has a very different history than Palo Alto has had. And the youth worked over a 7-year period with researchers from Stanford to really kind of identify what they felt as a community of color was needed in the city. One of the things that they said was that they often had to migrate out of their own home, out of their own city, in order to be able to have access to opportunity, to resources, to things that normally people would consider as part of being their home life and easily accessible. And so EPACENTER was born from this 7-year-long work that they did in talking with members of the community, other youth, community leaders, and they identified the need for a creative youth development center, someplace where they could actually, using culturally relevant methodologies, be able to have access to opportunities that were not accessible to them at that time. So that is, it's an impressive amount of work for them to have done, and the end result is that we are actually opening this year a 25,000 square foot state-of-the-art facility that with youth ages 3 to 25 will be able to develop in the arts and technology, workforce development programs, classes, etc., and really have access to the opportunities that Silicon Valley basically is able to provide, but has not been accessible to African American, Latino, and Pacific Islander communities. I think one of the things, though, that's important to think about East Palo Alto is its history in response, to what Diana is talking about, is that, obviously it was Ohlone land, and then there was a period up until the 40s or so where there were many Japanese Americans and migrants from Japan who were engaged in working in East Palo Alto around flower fields, and kind of doing a lot of that work, and then were actually put into the concentration camps during World War II, and then afterwards African Americans were forced to move into that part of the valley as a result of redlining. And what ended up happening was there was basically a tale of two cities. That the development that was happening in Palo Alto up through the 70s, 80s, and 90s was not happening in East Palo Alto. The area actually, East Palo Alto became a site for, to Diana's point, numerous chemical plants that were leaching a lot of chemicals into the ground and poisoning the groundwater and the soil itself, such that eventually youth in the community actually rose up and fought to have some of those chemical companies, Romic being one of them, removed from the city. And so what's eventually happened is that African Americans, were really working very hard to try to make a new place to live for themselves. But by the 80s and 90s, there were problems around drug use and lack of opportunity that people, tried to band together, and then there became an influx of migrants from Latin America and Central America, such that now this is a multicultural community that is dealing with, the history of, migration, but also the history of not having access to the technological innovations that are common to the area. So EPACENTER itself, believe it or not, is actually located on a Superfund site. And so the actual churning of the land, right, the actual reclaiming of that space for themselves, and in addition to that, from people migrated to this area, for them to be able to kind of plant their dreams there and see that grow. That's really what EPACENTER is all about. It's the culmination of their thoughts, their thought leadership about what they would like to see for their children to actually now come to fruition, is what EPACENTER is really about. And I think, one of the things that we have tried to add is this technological focus at the center, to, speaking to Diana's point about who, and Maggie, as you were saying, about who gets to create technology, who has access to it, who gets to be innovative, and considered, who gets to be that person who says, I invented something that changed the world. Our objective is to make sure that that is an accessible opportunity to all.
I just want to say that's amazing. I didn't know that it's a Superfund site. So, and it's so great to hear how EPACENTER is really just building up on that.
Yeah, yeah. It made me think a lot about, when you talking about how we use technology, and one of the questions that I kind of have for you, we can move into that space, I don't know if that's possible, is, maybe you could talk a little bit more about, using, technology to communicate through different means. Maybe you could talk a little bit about how you see, what does the next nest look like? Given, what's been happening recently around, talks about civil unrest, from the civil unrest that happened last year, right? People really trying to invest in creating opportunity for migrant populations, recent immigrants, African Americans, Latinos who've been here, who are just coming. What do you think is the next iteration? What gives you hope about that next?
Oh my goodness, that's such a good question. And not one that I think I can fully answer because I think it's always evolving. And something to think about with the nest in the show is my dad helped me with the technology part of that piece. So I don't even know what's going on in that box inside the nest. But I like to think, I saw this Instagram post that like our immigrant parents are the artists of our family, are the first artists of our family, because they have to create ways to build a new home. So I think of my dad as an artist. He probably doesn't think of himself like that, but the fact that I was able to collaborate with him on art in this creative way makes me think a lot about like the collectivism that is showing up after the civil unrest as well, and how folks are really just coming together and really watching out for our different communities and whatnot. So that's like the beginning of an answer for what a nest could look like. I don't know. I think we need to bring other people into this conversation too, because I do believe that it is like collective, and I think we need to like collaborate and really just show up for each other and sit with each other to talk about it and to experience it together. Yeah.
If I can jump in and ask a question, Diana, about that's jumping off of this point of community and activism that you've been speaking about, and you know, in my own research that I've been working on about Asian American artists and particularly women artists, you often see it is the case that women artists especially are often activists or community leaders and advocates. You know, I'm thinking about, I mean, in women in general, I'm thinking about Ruth Asawa, I'm thinking about Bernice Bing, I'm thinking about how they have been active with AWA like you have, with Soma Arts, you know, with various community organizations and entities around the Bay Area. And I'm also curious about that because it's a very deliberate turn. It's an effort that's directed outward, not necessarily inward, which a lot of people consider creative practice to be a very inwardly driven kind of motivation. So I'd love to just hear from your artist perspective about, and you too, Nadine, as a community leader, the way that which community practice is itself a kind of creative endeavor, and how that functions within your own thinking.
Yeah, so I think something that I need to talk about too is I made a transition after grad school. I think during grad school, I was just, I was very focused on that internal, like searching for myself artistically and whatnot. And I think the fact that we bring up the civil unrest that happened last year, it's very reminiscent of what we were experiencing in 2016, 2016-17, which was my last year of grad school, and that election. And there were also a number of internal things at my school that happened that I did not agree with, and a number of anti-Black incidents that I just could not stand for. And so I was while I was like trying to focus on my art practice, I was also serving on the Committee on Diversity and Equity there. And there was like a lot of emotional labor that was happening, and it kind of shook me. And so I think reflecting on my career as an artist back then, I think I wanted to move from this individualistic space of like showing on white walls in galleries and museums, and really think about the community that I was already rooting myself in. I started interning at the Asian American Women Artists Association before grad school in 2014. And that just really became a home for me. And I joined the Emerging Curators program and curated Appendix with Therina Alejo, who's in this call too. And that turned into a collective of its own. And I think I kind of forgot the rest of your question, but I'm just like really privileged to work with these organizations. And something else is that I think in terms of the creative practice of being an arts organizer and arts administrator is that something that I really get out of it is helping other artists be producers as well. So not just showing their artwork at someone else's request, but also building and curating their own spaces and doing that for themselves and their communities and whatnot. So that's something that's really empowering for me. Yeah, in terms of the creative end, I would say, yeah.
Yeah, I want to piggyback on that idea of helping artists be producers. I think what was very different from my previous positions is that I came in kind of thinking at first, art and all of these different things and the fantasticness that we would do. And I realized quite quickly that given the number of people who were coming up to me and asking for opportunity, how much the effect of the lack of opportunity had affected generations of people in East Palo Alto, from the young all the way up to the 70s who were their 70s who were really asking for opportunity and to see how Epicenter could make their own dreams come about. And that I had to understand that I was in a position of privilege, probably for the first time in my life, coming into an executive directorship. Also had to be very conscientious about taking a step back and not being the person who was coming up with the vision and the this and the that, because there were so many people who would be fantastic at this opportunity, hadn't had access to it, and needed a platform. And so I felt like my role was actually, I feel like my role is actually being a place for them to find that platform, to find their own voice. I don't need to do that. I was like, and it's much more powerful if everyone can be activated in that way, right? If there's all of this innovation that needs to happen, can't just be done by 1 or 2 or 3 people. So that's what I think a lot about. And I take it, it's an awesome responsibility. And what I mean by awesome, not like in the wow kind of way, but you understand the import that this type of opportunity can have really on people's lives. And that it's important to provide this equal playing field. So that's what I have thought about also, is how we can be producers from the young all the way up to the old, all the way through, for everyone to be able to envision their creative dreams in some way or another through Epicenter. And it's a tremendous asset at 25,000 square feet. It's not a small, thing, but it can do a lot of work. And so I think of it as an engine in that way.
Amazing. I don't want to be too essentializing in saying that, like, I do think it is notable that this is a women-led discussion, because I think women know more in certain ways that, like, context is everything, that you need context to be able to create, and like helping others have the appropriate context in terms of platform, in terms of access, in terms of space, in terms of time, spend a lot of time caring for others, and we know that, right? And so we understand also that you need access to those time, to those resources and those spaces in order to be able to be set up to creatively produce. So that doesn't just happen like out of nowhere, you know what I mean? That it really, you need to be able to have that, and and knowing that, I could see why you want to kind of provide that for other people, because you know what is needed.
Totally, yeah. And I see you doing that with the new Asian Arts Initiative too. And I wonder if you can speak to that as well on your end.
Oh, sure. Well, that's great. Kind of you to ask. So yeah, the new Asian American Art Initiative is something that Professor Marcy Kwan and I have been working on for a few years. And, we spent a lot of time really just learning and building and trying to create the infrastructure to be able to publicly launch in this way, and be able to speak about it with the community. And so for me at the moment, I feel a little selfish in the sense that what I've been doing has been very sort of insular for the last couple of years. And I hope that we can have a more outward facing community engaging branch as time goes on. But working inside of an institution like a museum, for me, the priority was, if you want to talk about Asian American art, you have to have a collection of Asian American art. You have to have a body of work to work with. In a way, what you're doing is you're trying to care for artists who were not cared about necessarily during their lifetime. So, so we brought in, now it's, you know, more than 150 objects, and we really focused on building a historical collection first, because I think when you think about Asian American art, there's lots of amazing contemporary Asian American artists like yourself, but you don't necessarily think about them having been working here, you know, for hundreds of years, which they have been. And in thinking about art and technology too, thinking about Asian Americans and immigrants and Black and brown folks being the progenitors of technology, thinking about technology in a historical sense, like the railroad is technology, and who is building it but Chinese Americans, right? And thinking about the location that we're in, thinking about amazing things like that San Francisco had the first Chinatown, but also more difficult things like, you know, the Tanforan Assembly Center, the Incarceration Center was here in San Bruno. So there's a really multi-layered history of, you know, people building the land, caring for the land, and also making art itself as a kind of creative technology. So it really seemed like the right place to do it. And so eventually, now that we have these works of art in the building and we can begin caring for them and showing them, then the next step is to engage our community stakeholders to talk about the things that we have and share it with everyone and provide access to this material.
I wanted to follow up. Hi, everybody. Sorry for my internet problems. But Aleesa, I know that you've been doing some research on some of the Asian American Art Initiative artists like Bernice Bing, artists who are Bay Area locals and who have worked in arts organizing and education here in the past. Can you tell us a little bit about that research that you've been doing? I'm so interested to hear about, you know, the Asian American Women Artists Association and how it's connecting Diana, contemporary artists, to some of her predecessors.
Oh yeah, thanks. I mean, I think I kind of mentioned it in my question to Diana. I'm just in this place where I'm sort of deep into research about Bernice Bing and Ruth Asawa and learning more about them. Of course, Bernice Bing was the great mid-century Bay Area Chinese American abstract painter, and Ruth Asawa is very well known for her hanging wire sculptures. But the more that you learn about both of their artistic careers, the more that you learn how engaged in various community organizations these artists were, and how art history has a tendency to erase that from the narrative, because they don't, there's still kind of this like white male romantic myth of just like creation and putting an object out there, but not really acknowledging all the other things that are a part of these women's creative practices. And, you know, Ruth Asawa has like a high school named after her because, you know, education was so important to her that she devoted a large part of her life to making sure that the arts were accessible to everyone. If you read the new amazing Ruth Asawa biography that was produced in part because of access to her papers at the Stanford libraries, you really learn that education and access was the most important thing for her above all, and that everybody should have access to creative expression, which I think is like very much what the ethos of EPACENTER sounds like to be. And like that kind of accessibility is essential to like the healthy fabric of like any culture. So both, I think, Bernice Bing and Ruth Asawa believed this fundamentally, and they would take kind of hiatuses and breaks in the way that you were speaking of, Diana, from like pursuing their own, making their own work, and then investing that time instead into the community, which I think is really powerful and important, and that art history needs to remember that kind of labor.
That's so well said. I want to leave time for our audience to ask questions, but I do have one last question for the three of you for transitioning into that. And that would be, it's a combo question. What are you working on now that you want people to know about? And what is your vision for the future of the arts and community in the Bay Area?
I think going back to Nadine's question about a new nest is something beautiful that really came out of the civil unrest last summer. Was all these artists were showing, I mean, this whole year too, these artists have been making masks for the pandemic. Artists have been like making murals in response to what's happening in our society. Artists are doing a lot right now. They're writing postcards to voters and whatnot and getting people out to vote. And I think there's like a critical juncture that's happening right now in this moment where art is really being utilized to heal and think about the resiliency of our communities. So I'm interested to see what's just going to happen in the next few years with art and how art will be kind of bridging that support for our communities. And in terms of like what I'm up to now, AWAT, talking about the environment, we're curating an exhibition that's going to be launched on April 30th, and it'll happen throughout the month of May, called Sewing Agency. And it's meant to highlight the leaders of or environmental justice leaders within our communities. We're partnering with the Asian Pacific Environmental Network and the Berkeley South Asian Radical History Walking Tour, and a number of other organizations. And we're really excited to put that together and really think about how art can bring that conversation into our culture and be utilized in that way. Yeah, another plug is that for Women's History Month, we're also planning a number of programs. One of them is our Slide Slam happening on March 27th, where a number of our members that you can see on that same website that Maggie found me on will be presenting their art in a super fast format of 4 slides in 4 minutes. I would recommend checking that out too.
Some Nadine and Aleesa, any hopes for the future that you want to share?
Go ahead, Nadine.
Yeah, you know, I think that you know, I might start off actually talking a little bit about something that's coming up. It's going to have a long horizon, but I think it does speak to our hopes for the future. So we are currently about to launch a big 2-year-long project, a filmmaking project. It's an augmented reality, virtual reality film that we'll be making with students in the community about the effects of technology on gentrification in East Palo Alto. It will specifically be focusing on the technology, maybe even focusing on, you know, the pursuit of technology and so forth, and how that pursuit is actually displacing, you know, real life people. And it specifically, you know, takes the idea of looking at, you know, that the headset that you need to view through in order to, you know, be able to see a film like that. It's kind of like you're referring back to the very technology that may actually be displacing, you know, the people who live there. So it's very meta kind of commentary about technology and you know, how we are, you know, so attached to it, and at the same time it's long-term effects. So we're really excited about doing projects like that because we want to push the envelope. We want to have it so that youth in East Palo Alto are actually working on cutting edge things, and they're making stuff that people are like, wow, I haven't seen that before. We were kind of inspired by a film called Traveling While Black that was made out of, you know, down in the South around the, you know, people not being able to travel, you know, at a certain period of time in this country. And so we're taking that concept and talking about East Palo Alto. And so that kind of goes back to this idea for a vision, you know, for arts and community in the Bay Area. What I am hopeful about is that this moment in time where so many things are kind of being disrupted, and a lot of ideas around technology, who gets to create and who gets to have, and all of these things, if we can really harness that and use it as a moment, an inflection point of saying, well, what can we make that's new, and how can organizations, really kind of say, oh my gosh, the shackles are off, and we can think a little bit differently. What can this be, this new thing? That's kind of where we want to be at the cusp of, is making that stuff that's new, that's in response to what we've learned already, about the effects of so many different things that have not been helpful for so many people in this country. That's what gives me hope. That's what I think creativity has the real power to do, to Aleesa's point. And we want to make sure that we're pushing forward and that we're partnering with organizations and people who want to see that happen too.
Same. I think Nadine said it best about what there is to look forward to and to be hopeful about, and my small tiny hope is that the museum can open so everyone can see When Home Won't Let You Stay and Diana's piece before the show closes at the end of May. So.
That is also my hope. So anybody out there? Oh, we've got a question from Irina.
Diana, in our experience of working with youth, what's your experience of redirecting energy and still grounded in a lot of joy?
Yeah.
Especially in this time of divisions, especially with, like racial solidarity that's much needed. How do you see that in the cross-cultural solidarity work that you're doing from your home base as someone who works with AWA and APIC?
Yeah, I think that's also something that's sort of a challenge, because to address institutionally, I think, because also for AWA and APIC, we're also used to supporting artists as their own producers. So I think the power really lies in like empowering artists to really think about that. In terms of redirecting energy, it's definitely a challenge, but I think it's important to really like check in with ourselves and with each other about all of the difficulties that are happening, all the challenges that are happening, and offer that space for reflection. In some of my meetings for AWA and APIC, for me personally, I think it's helpful to have like a really extensive check-in before like getting down to logistics for whatever we're working on, especially because we are living in an unpredictable moment, such as the one that we witness right now. And I think just offering space for ourselves to feel together, whether it's positive or negative, and just, I guess, yeah, really check in about that and think about that. In terms of like this interracial solidarity, I think all of us really need to show up for Black lives. And I think it's a challenge for anyone to see like not only the horrific stuff we just witnessed just now, but also like the what's happening in the news and in the media. And if anything, I just wish breath and space for people who are struggling right now. And yeah, I think that's how I can answer that question in this moment, but yeah.
Any other questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rima. I am an undergrad at Stanford, and I'm also kind of a community organizer specifically around public art projects. And I was wondering, like, what kind of advice do you have for someone who's just now getting started in that area? I know you've kind of given some tips, but if you have anything else that you wish you had known when you were starting out or anything like that.
I think just making sure you're really intentional about where your energy is at. When I think I went to grad school because someone told me I would be good at it. But I also just wanted to explore my own art practice. And a lot of people go to grad school to become a professor and to teach and whatnot. And I tried that and it didn't work for me. I tried it with Arena as well. And I had a lot of fun teaching youth how to use photography through Arena's program, Sama Pagmahal. But I think my energy just wasn't there as an educator. And I think a lot of people have the talent for that and the energy for that. But I think at the same time, I was kind of following someone else's script when I was doing that. So that's one piece of advice I would give. And the other thing is now I'm not making any work about technology. So offering yourself flexibility for how your work will change, how you will engage with community, how you'll explore yourself and how you work with others is definitely important. And it's like a moment to be introspective on, like, I guess, how you engage with yourself creatively and with others and whatnot. In terms of like me not making video work, I'm doing fiber art now and just exploring embroidery and crochet but also like how it relates to mental health and it's also just a really good kind of art medium to work in during shelter in place without a studio. But yeah, I would just think about being really intentional with your own, where your heart goes. I would recommend this book called The Artist's Way as well, which takes you through different steps and weeks to really reflect. And it's also very personal, but it really gets you at trying to address where your spirits are headed and whatnot. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, same thing. Diana, I relate so much to what you said and about your own journey about being an educator and where to direct one's energies and really realizing that you're only one person and you can only have so much time. So you should, as much as you can, figure out what the thing is where you want to devote your time. And because, you know, I'm sure we all relate, we don't want to do everything all the time, but we can't do that and then we'll do a bad job and we won't take care of ourselves. So it's important to remember that even when you take time to make yourself a nice meal or have a long phone call with a friend, that's important to whatever else you're choosing to do, because it's an investment in yourself. And so, you know, really just taking the time to figure out exactly where you can have the most impact and what you enjoy doing the most. Because I went to grad school too, Diane. I taught for a lot too, and I enjoy it, but it wasn't the thing where I felt like that was like where my spirit wanted to take me, you know what I mean? And maybe there's a different place where you can have as much impact. So just give yourselves the space to figure out whatever that path is.
Yeah, I think some really good advice that I got in my adulthood is just feel free to try things on, and if it doesn't work, just move on to the next thing you want to try.
Exactly. You're not married to anything. Mm-hmm. You know, you can change at any time.
Yeah.
And I would add too, Rima, you've been in touch with me about your work, which I really appreciate. And I think you're like, keep networking and keep reaching out to people, and also keep following up with them when they don't get back to you in a timely manner. And find people that are good collaborators for you. My colleague Aleesa, who's on this call, is a great collaborator for me. And I know that when I have a project that maybe I can't take on by myself, but I can take on with someone else, you know, I have at least one person that I can ask, are you excited about this too? Do you want to do this together? And having some kind of support structure like that can help enable you to do the things that you want when you are only one person can be really meaningful.
Nice, Maggie. It's true. Since we have Arena here, Arena, can I ask you to talk a bit about your recent project at SF MoMA and share with because I think it's related and would be of interest. Not to put you on the spot, you also don't have to, I'm just saying.
No worries. I think also, side note, I think Rima, were we on emails before?
It's possible, yeah. I've reached out just about like every arts related person on campus.
Yes, I remember your photo project, and how the site specificity of that. It's really beautiful. Same for my work as I think Rima's work is about, was it in Artsakh?
Artsakh, yes, which is a divided region in Armenia. Just for
one of my and Diana's mutual friends, my former partner, is in Yerevan right now. But then I learned a lot from that kind of work to work on my current commission with SF MoMA, which is called My Ancestors Followed Me Here. And it's about just one stretch of San Francisco called Mission Street. And I interviewed essential workers throughout fall, just a little bit after, fall, like September, October, to learn more about what it means for them to be working or not working. And also I worked with folks who are interlocutors with community. So while I don't speak Spanish and I don't speak Chinese, I collaborated with artists who knew the cultural nuances of connecting with essential workers, and making sure that we really include their voices and their input when interviewing them, and looking over the edits for the photos and looking at their interviews. And so that's going to be up when SF MoMA reopens. So I hope you all can see it. And it's part of Bay Area Walls. So I'm just one of many artists, local artists, who are featured in that. I share the space with Adrian Burrell, whose work is about Oakland and his recently passed grandmother. So it's helping me learn a lot about what solidarity looks like, and even learning how to navigate larger institutions like SF MoMA, and really trusting in the work of our curators, Lindy and Sally, and taking care of us and understanding how we have a seat at the table. And so we use that role responsibly, but also vigilantly, and holding folks accountable.
Something I'm thinking back to your question, Irina, about how I find myself working with APIC and AWA and doing interracial, interethnic work and cross-cultural work and whatnot. And I think something that's really been amazing is just witnessing the Asian American jazz movement becoming a thing again. And I mean, it's been a thing that people haven't recognized, but Francis Wong and John Jing and Jenny Lim and the work that they're doing that they've done also in terms of like giving credit and offering credit to Black creators and whatnot. And I also think about our other friend Vita's interview for Chinatown Shorts and thinking about how all the community organizations that we're working in and benefiting from were developed with inspiration to the Black movement in the 60s and 70s. And so and the Third World Liberation Front too. So it's just so I just wanted to bring that into the space because it was an afterthought about your question. But yeah, I think like we all have roots in this history and we just need to recognize it and educate folks on it. And we do that through the arts and culture. Yeah.
Through the work of important curators like Maggie and Aleesa, who really help us document our histories. And Aubrey also, a blossoming curator.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Wonderful note to end on, thanking curators, but also what Diana said about really having all of us having roots in these histories and having to grapple with these histories and do our good work as arts educators and arts organizers and artists. So I want to thank everybody for coming tonight, and thank you, Diana and Aleesa and Nadine, so much for joining me in conversation, and Arena for jumping on to join the conversation too. Rima for your great questions, everyone that was here for your questions. We have a couple of events that are coming up. Aubrey will put up a slide so you can see some more events that are coming up. And I encourage you to go see When Home Won't Let You Stay online until we're able to welcome you into the museum. So with that, good night, everyone. Take care, be well, and drink some tea or wine, whatever your poison is. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so much, Maggie.
Thanks, Diana. Bye.